Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. In this one, I'll be taking a look at the SA-58 and showing you 3 recoil-focused builds for this awesome and powerful rifle. The SA-58 is by far one of my favorite weapons in Escape from Tarkov, and I see it as an almost perfect blend of raw power, accuracy, and versatility when set up correctly. Because it fires the powerful 7.62 by 51mm round, the SA-58 really packs a punch, and even with cheap M80 ammo, you can drop most players in 1 to 3 shots if you're accurate. Of course, on the flip side, 7.62 by 51 does have some pretty intense recoil, and it can require some careful aim and trigger discipline to be used to full effect. Another thing to keep in mind with the SA-58 is that it is a heavy, bulky gun, which means the ergonomics are not exactly amazing. Thankfully, there are some great attachments to help bring the recoil down to a more manageable level on the SA-58, and that's the focus of this video, and I'll be going over a budget, mid-tier, and high-end build for recoil control on the SA-58. Something I found interesting while pricing out these builds is that while the budget build is somewhat expensive compared to something like an AK, the top tier setup is actually about the same price as a fully kitted AK and much less expensive than a fully kitted M4. Before I get into the builds, I'd like to get a few things out of the way here. First, my recoil control skill might be higher or lower than yours, so our recoil numbers might not match up exactly. Second, like with the 5.56 weapons, the Daniel Defense Wave Muzzle Brake and Suppressor is one of the best recoil control options for the SA-58, but it's also significantly more expensive than a compensator at around 63,000 rubles. With that in mind, I'll show each build with the compensator at first, and then at the end of each segment, I'll show the build with the Wave Suppressor as well. Just keep in mind, you'll need to add 30 to 50,000 rubles to the price of these builds if you want to run the suppressor. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at some recoil-focused SA-58 builds. Of course, to start things off, I'll be taking a look at my budget SA-58 recoil setup, which just uses a handful of carefully selected parts to bring the recoil down as much as possible. However, as you'll see, a budget setup doesn't go a long way to countering the harsh recoil of a 7.62 rifle on full auto. To start off, I always buy a base SA-58 with a 21-inch barrel on the flea market for about 50,000 rubles, and this has all you need to start off a build. I strip off all these parts except the dust cover and barrel and start from the ground up. The first addition I make is the LANTAC Dragon Compensator, which is sold by Peacekeeper level 4. This has the highest recoil reduction of the 7.62 compensators, and if you don't have this one, I would recommend something like the Atlas Compensator instead. Next, one of my favorite budget SA-58 attachments is the Universal M-LOK Handguard, sold by Mechanic level 3. This gives you a nice ergonomics boost, but more importantly, lets you mount a red dot sight on top and a foregrip on the bottom. This handguard takes M-LOK rails to put a foregrip on, and on this setup, I went with the MAGPUL RVG foregrip sold by Peacekeeper level 3. This one is slightly more expensive than the RK0 grip I used in my other builds, but it gives some much needed ergonomics to the SA-58, so I think the little extra cost is worth it. For the sight on this one, I mounted a DELTAPOINT up on the handguard, because I like how the reticle looks when it's mounted farther up, and because it has no ergonomics penalty. This one is about 14,000 rubles from Peacekeeper level 2, but you can also use other micro red dots like the Aimpoint or PK06 as well. The only other real big addition to this build is the SA-58 buffer tube adapter from Mechanic level 2, which lets you attach the SI advanced buffer tube from Mechanic level 4, gaining some extra recoil reduction in the process. For the stock, I like the MFT BUS stock for budget recoil builds, since it has best in slot recoil stats for only $80 from Peacekeeper level 3. Finally, you can stick with the default pistol grip if you prefer, but for only about 3,000 rubles you can get the SAW pistol grip at Mechanic level 2 for some much needed ergonomics points. For the overall stats on this build, it came out to 102 recoil and 49 ergonomics with the compensator, or 94 recoil and 43 ergonomics with the suppressor. The Wave Suppressor is truly amazing, but it's also very expensive. As for the total cost, this build came out to around 110,000 rubles with the compensator, or around 165,000 rubles with the suppressor. As I said earlier, it's tough to get good recoil for the FAL on a budget, but as you'll see in this next build, with just a few extra parts you can cut this recoil down by almost 20 points. This mid-tier build is starting with essentially the same base parts as the previous setup. beginning with a stripped down SA-58 and adding the buffer tube adapter, an SI advanced buffer tube, and the universal M-LOK handguard. The first really big addition here is an interesting two-stage muzzle device called the LANTAC blast mitigation device. This basically allows you to add a compensator to your compensator for double the recoil control. First, you'll need to buy the direct thread adapter for this thing, and then the blast mitigation device itself, both of which can be found at Peacekeeper level 3. Next, you buy the same compensator from the last build, the LANTAC Dragon at Peacekeeper level 4, and add it onto the barrel as well. This setup does look a bit funny, like a cutoff suppressor, and it dramatically increases your muzzle flash, but this setup also really does help with recoil, and I've become quite a big fan of it. The next change on this build is the foregrip, upgrading to the ZENIT RK1 foregrip from skier level 3, purely for that extra point of recoil control. For the stock, you have a choice here. You can stick with the MFT BUS stock if you're not that concerned about ergonomics, or for about 3,000 rubles extra, you can switch to the HKE1 stock from Peacekeeper level 4. This one has the same recoil stats, but a bit more ergonomics to make up for the points lost from the compensator and the foregrip. I also upgraded the pistol grip on this one to the FAB AG FAL pistol grip from skier level 4. It's only about 4,000 rubles for 13 ergonomics, so it's a very good purchase. Finally, I strongly recommend getting both a railed dust cover and a riser for your sight if you're going to run the blast mitigation device. The reason for this is that the muzzle flash gets really intense, and just trust me, you're going to want to get your sight out of the way of that flash. The DS Arms Extreme Duty Dust Cover is the only one available for the SA-58, sold by Mechanic level 3, and lets you mount pretty much any optic that you'd want. For the riser, the LaRue Tactical Picatinny riser is quite cheap at only around 3,000 rubles at Mechanic level 2, and it works pretty well at getting your sight over the muzzle flash. Again on this one, I just went with the DELTAPOINT sight, so you'll have to add a bit onto the total cost if you want to use something more expensive. For the overall stats on this setup, I got the recoil down to 84 points and the ergonomics to 50 while using the compensator setup. With the suppressor, I had 91 recoil and 46 ergonomics. As you can see, just adding a few extra pieces brought the recoil down by as much as 18 points. As for the total cost, this setup came out to around 158,000 rubles with the compensator, or about 190,000 rubles with the suppressor. While this is quite a step up from the budget build, as you'll see in the next one, it's only about 20,000 rubles extra to go for the best in slot build instead. Moving on to the high-end best-in-slot recoil build for the SA-58, there's only a few differences from the mid-tier setup, which makes it a pretty convenient upgrade. The base of the rifle is identical to both the previous builds, a stripped-down SA-58 with the buffer tube adapter and an SI advanced buffer tube. For the muzzle device, I'm sticking with the same two-stage combo of the LANTAC Dragon and the LANTAC Blast Mitigation device from the last build, because it's the highest recoil reduction available on the SA-58. The main change from the previous build is the handguard, which has been swapped out for the VLTOR CASV FAL handguard, sold for about 17,000 rubles for Mechanic level 4. This handguard is the best in slot for the SA-58, adding some much needed recoil reduction to your build and a few points of ergonomics. You need a unique 5-inch CASV rail to add a foregrip, and for this setup, I went with the ZENIT RK2 foregrip from skier level 4. This one is expensive, and the ergonomics penalty is not great for an SA-58 build, but that 1 extra % of recoil reduction can be worth it on the SA-58, since it can take away up to 4 points of overall recoil. It's your call though, and if you would prefer a bit more ergonomics on your build, then stick with the RK1 foregrip from the last setup. Next, I made a change to the stock that actually loses 1 point of recoil control in exchange for quite a few ergonomics points, but this build kind of needs it. I went with the MOE stock and rubber pad combo, sold by Peacekeeper level 3 for about $120 total. If you'd like, you can stick with the HKE1 stock from the last build for 1 more point of recoil control, but that's your call. Like I did with the mid-tier build, I added the Extreme Duty Dust Cover to get a top rail for optics, and I also picked up the LaRue Tactical Riser to get my sight out of the muzzle flash. Again, I also went with the same FAB AG FAL pistol grip because it's best in slot for a very cheap price. For the overall stats on this one, I got the recoil down to 73 points and the ergonomics to 55 points when running with a compensator. With a suppressor, the recoil came out at 81 points with 51 ergonomics. You could even bring this down by another few points by using the HKE1 stock instead, but you'll also lower your ergonomics. For the total cost of this build, it came out to around 177,000 rubles with the compensator, or around 210 to 220,000 rubles with the suppressor. As you can see, the budget and mid-tier setups aren't the cheapest around, but it doesn't take much extra cash to just run a best-in-slot recoil build, which I thought was pretty interesting. Well, that about covers it for these 3 recoil-focused SA-58 builds. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you now have a pretty good understanding of what some of the best attachments are for bringing down the recoil on an SA-58. These rifles are probably overall my favorite in Escape from Tarkov because few others can make kills on geared players consistently in 1 to 3 shots at any range. So I always find myself going back to the old right arm of the free world. I'll be streaming more Escape from Tarkov on Twitch at twitch.tv/jdogthewise, and it'd be great to have you drop by the stream, so I'll leave a link for that in the description. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.